So we each made a list of literally 200 people. The first 20, easy. Family, friends, great. People that I'm really close with. The next, 100, a little bit tougher, but it was college acquaintances, friends from high school, more extended family. The last 50 people, Matt, I'm texting ex-girlfriends to be like, hey, I'm launching a podcast.
Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome to 5-Minute Founders, the show where we pick the brains of actual founders for the strategies, growth hacks, and stories of how they built their own companies. I'm your host, Matt LeBlanc, and my guest today is the founder of the revenue media platform 30 Minutes to President's Club, which includes the #1 sales podcast in the world. Nick Cegelski, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I wanted to, let's just jump right in. Why don't you tell us, what is your business and what does it solve for?
Sure. So I run a media company called 30 Minutes to President's Club. And what we do is we create content that is quite popular with sales leaders and sales teams. And the reason for that is there is a lot of sales and selling related content that talks about what to do, or it's focused on high level motivation and not as much on the how to do it. I think most human beings know that in order to be a good salesperson, you need to have empathy, you need to be a good listener, you have to help the clients. People know that stuff and they don't want to listen to podcasts where someone is going rah, beat their chest and saying, you got to have empathy to sell. They want to understand the technical elements of selling. What do I actually say when the client shows up and is like, all right, show me what you got? Or, all right, give me your pitch. How do you have empathy and be a good listener in those scenarios? And so our content focuses exclusively on things that salespeople can do, say, or write that very day to make an impact in how they sell and show up with prospects and customers. And so that's sort of what we solve for on the helping salespeople building an audience side. On a monetization perspective, we monetize exclusively via sponsorships and ads. So think podcast ads, webinar sponsorships, etc., typically with revenue tech companies.
Gotcha. Yeah. And when you're talking about content that you make, you do, so 30 Minutes to President's Club, you do a podcast, a newsletter. I see different sort of IP products on your site, different toolkits and things like that. And then, like you said, also webinars and kind of events. Yeah. Yeah.
And then also, we have a pretty substantive LinkedIn social presence from me and then my co-host on the show. And so I would call that, it's sort of a product. It's frankly a catch-all for a lot of the stuff that we learn on the podcast, we repackage and put out on social.
Gotcha. Yeah, you are a top voice on LinkedIn, which I did have to sort of look up. What does that actually mean? It means you're a top creator on LinkedIn, which is pretty cool.
LinkedIn is a weird platform, though. I'll tell you this. LinkedIn is the one platform where you can have, I think I have 60,000 followers right now. I'm a top voice, which is their designation that this is someone you should follow. And it is the one platform where you can have 60,000 followers and I'll have a post go out and get 23 likes. It's amazing. You go through my feed after this, you'll see there will be a post with 900 likes, which is the 1,000 mark is about as good as you're going to get on LinkedIn. And then the next day or the next hour, I'll have a post that has 2 likes. It's really, really interesting the way that LinkedIn's algorithm works relative to some other platforms. You had 60,000 followers on LinkedIn and you got 20 likes on something, something went horribly, horribly wrong. On LinkedIn, that's just that's another day. But I'm grateful for the platform. I've grown a great audience. I've grown a business off of it. So I can't complain too loudly.
How are you growing an audience of 60,000 followers on LinkedIn? Do you have any strategies or things that you've done that you can share with us?
Yeah, I think this goes back to what I said earlier, which is you've got to get into the granular, here is how to do something. I think there's 2 tangible pieces of advice I would give. One is when folks are looking to build an audience, they often model the type of content that they are putting out there off of big creators. But there is a difference between content that is designed to entertain and content that is designed to educate. On LinkedIn specifically, people are showing up on LinkedIn and they're consuming content on LinkedIn not because they want to be entertained. They're not looking for a Mr. Beast video where he decides to smash a Lamborghini or eat 5,000 hamburgers in one sitting to see what it does to his stomach. Like, people are not going to LinkedIn for entertaining content. They are going for educational content. And what that means is the content that you create for LinkedIn has to come from a place of like, okay, this is designed and structured and formatted to educate, not to entertain. And a lot of folks will look at like a Mr. Beast of the world, or like other entertaining creators, and think that's what they need to put on LinkedIn, when that channel is really, really different. And so step one is understand the intent of why your audience shows up on that channel. LinkedIn is, I want to get better at my job. And then everything you put on LinkedIn has to come from a place of like, that post native to LinkedIn needs to help somebody do their job better. So I have an audience of salespeople and sales leaders. Every piece of content I put out has to be, here's something you can do in your job to do it better. And I see a lot of people on LinkedIn, they'll like, example, okay, when I share this interview on LinkedIn, because I presume you're going to send it to me, Matt, and I promote it on LinkedIn, what I can't do is make a post and be like, enjoyed this conversation with Matt. It was really fun. Go check it out. Because there is zero give in that post for the audience. There has to be a, hey, even if you don't go watch the full interview, here's some value in the post. Hey, here were my top 3 things that I covered. Boom, boom, boom. By the way, if you want more, go check it out. Some of it is like, there's this book that Gary Vee wrote, Jab, 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 Right Hook. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but I stole a lot of his approach. Basically, the thesis of the book is, when you are trying to build an audience, there are 2 types of content that you can create. And he likens it to a boxing match. There are jabs, and then there are right hooks. A jab is a value-add give to your audience. So it's a post that is designed just to give. In the case of LinkedIn, it's just designed to teach. Hey, here's some free value. Here's a tip for your next sales call. Here's a tip for your next negotiation. Give. And a right hook is an ask of the audience. Hey, go download this ebook that we did. Hey, sign up for this webinar that we're promoting. Hey, go check out this sponsor that pays my bills. And when you are working to build an audience, you need to have way more jabs than you do right hooks. And you need to jab a lot before you even earn the right to throw your first right hook. And he talks about in a boxing match, if you show up and try to knock your opponent out with a right hook in the beginning, like, they're going to dodge it. They're fresh. It's early in the match. You've got to wear them down with the jabs. Building an audience and then having an offer to the audience is the same. It's give. And then once you've built up your trust and credibility with them, that's when you knock them out. And so there's a rhythm to things, which is you've got to have way more gives than asks.
Absolutely. It's an awesome analogy and actually feels really appropriate to this conversation. Nick, you started wrestling in middle school. That's, I think, sort of the initial community that you found yourself in. You wrestled through college in USC and were actually a wrestling coach at USC for, I think, a decade or so. And you've mentored kids in this area. As far as I can tell, it was really sort of your first experience with coaches and coaching. So I'm wondering, what coaching, mentorship skills, leadership skills did you take from the wrestling world that are most applicable to what you do now?
I'm not sure if I'm going to call this a coaching skill, but I will tell you the number one thing that I've learned from wrestling is the first thing that my high school wrestling coach said to the team on the first day of practice when I was new to the team. I remember walking into practice and everyone's sort of nervous and they gather around the coach and they're ready to start wrestling. We sort of all sit down for the pre-practice like speech plan. And the first thing he said to the team, it's still stuck in my head, is if you want to be a great wrestler, you have to be disciplined. And the definition of discipline is doing what you don't want to do when you don't want to do it. And I think that translates to business and life. If you want to be a great business person, if you want to be a great partner, if you want to be great in life, you have to be disciplined and you have to do things that you don't want to do, especially when you don't want to do them. And from a sales perspective, that shows up in the form of doing extra prep for the calls or doing the prospecting work that you really don't want to do, knocking on doors, making cold calls, sending cold emails. Nobody wants to do those things. But feeling like doing something is not a prerequisite to actually doing the work. And that's something that I've internalized from wrestling, which is the skill of discipline, which is separating what you feel like doing and what you know you need to do, and then doing the thing that you don't need, that you know you need to do instead, and pulling the feeling out of it. If you just let your gut guide you in terms of like where you spend your time, I think you're gonna miss relative to someone who's far more disciplined.
Absolutely. That's such great insight. Also, I feel like I see so much correlation actually between maybe the wrestling world and what you are doing specifically with 30 Minutes to President's Club wrestling. I wrestled for 1 year in junior high, but very tactical sport, right? And now you've got this brand that claims, the most value dense sales tactics that you'll find. No theory, no mindset. Anything that you cannot implement today will be cut out. It feels super tactical.
Yes. Well, it is. I mean, that's by design. So if you want to just even get into our content strategy, I think there's a belief that a lot of folks have as it relates to content that more content equals better. And I don't believe that. I believe more great content is better. And I'll give you a really, really real example for like our podcast. The show is called 30 Minutes to President's Club. The final product, how long is it? It's 30 minutes long. We record with our guests for 60 minutes, and we throw half of the interview of every interview in the trash. We cut, meaning we never publish, about 20% of our episodes, which I'm not necessarily proud of it doesn't ever feel good to invite somebody onto your podcast and not publish that content. But our number one loyalty is to our audience. Without the audience, we have nothing. And there are so many new people as you grow and grow and grow who will get exposed to your content for the first time. And if the first episode they listen to is like a 6 out of 10 episode, that's a really bad first impression, and that person isn't going to stick. And when we think about the content that we produce, it all comes from the perspective of like, if somebody was getting exposed to that for the very first time, would they say, wow, this is some of the best sales content that I've ever consumed? And if the answer to that is no, then it shouldn't be published. And so even the best guests, like even this interview, you might say, wow, Nick's really great. This is a good interview. Like there's stuff where I've repeated myself, where I've like made points that are like, that's sort of a dud. We really, really try to refine everything that we put out so that the audience is only getting the greatest hits. And so more content is better in that it allows you to then be really, really selective as it relates to what you publish. I might compare it to, I don't know, like a musical artist who's putting together an album and they record 40 songs, but only 12 songs actually make it onto that album because they know it's not about the quantity, it is about the elite quality that's really going to build an audience.
Absolutely. It's so interesting to hear that you're recording 60-minute episodes because I've been listening to the podcast and you do such a great job at really driving people towards that actionable sales advice. I'm not technically a salesperson. I feel like I'm learning things because you are so adamant about driving the conversation in that direction. I'm curious, you're so, I mean, being tactic focused is obviously the niche that you're in, but you seem like somebody who's really strong in the mindset area. You've got a strong mindset. You have a strong personal and business philosophy. Is there a place for that? Where is the place for teaching that?
That is what really makes the difference in business and life. But I don't think you build a brand, a really compelling brand off of mindset and motivation. I mean, I guess you could be David Goggins, but that's I'll tell you, for me, when I was building my brand and building my audience, you have to choose, like, where are you actually going to be the best in the world? This is actually, I'll take you to this. There's a really great book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. And he talks about in this book something that he calls the hedgehog philosophy. Don't ask me how he comes up with the name, but the idea behind the hedgehog philosophy is that when you are starting a business and you're trying to figure out where you're going to compete, you need to look at your offering needs to check the box for 3 things. Thing number 1, it has to be something that you can be the best in the world at. Not the third best, not the second best, but the best in the world at. Number 2, it has to be something that like you're actually excited about and actually passionate about. And then number 3, it has to be economically feasible, meaning like you have to be able to make money off of that thing. Otherwise, you shouldn't do that venture, even if you will be the best in the world at. And so when I was thinking about the audience that I wanted to build and the business that I wanted to build off of that audience, I had to think about, okay, for the purposes of this conversation, like, can I really be the best in the world at the motivational stuff? I think I'm pretty good at it, and I think it really makes a difference from a salesperson's success perspective. I just don't think I'm going to build a bigger audience than David Goggins, and I don't think I have better stuff than him. And so I'm better off just like learning from him, but I do think I have the best sales advice in the world and the most structured sales advice in the world. And so it's more about like what's the domain that I wanted to compete in than about does it matter or not. And I guess I'll give you one more piece of context is motivation and mindset and all of that stuff. That's sort of like, that's like the eating your vegetables part. And nobody wants to consume content of like, eat your vegetables, eat your vegetables, eat your vegetables, at least in the space that I'm in. People don't want to be told, salespeople and sales leaders don't want to be told, you got to work hard, just go get after it. You know, you got to do this. You got to get back up even if you get rejected. They want to know, what do I actually do? So a lot of nuance to that answer, and I've rambled quite a bit. Hopefully that was clear.
Absolutely. Nick, you need no advice on making a better podcast. I think that everything that you're doing is awesome, but you gave me an idea, so I'm going to give you an unsolicited pitch. Maybe it's an end of the year review. You take all of the greatest moments of mindset and philosophy from your guests, and you do a specialized episode where, look, we don't normally share this stuff, but this is some mindset and philosophy that we thought was super impactful. Maybe you will too. I'd be interested to hear.
I like it. Yeah, no, that could be a semi-regular series that we do and we let people know. I like that idea. Thanks for sharing it.
Let's get back to some actionable takeaways, though. Nick, you've grown 30 Minutes to President's Club. You've grown this since 2020, I believe. You've done it really quick. You're a top sales podcast in the world. Can you give me, on your show, you always ask for 3 actionable takeaways. So I suppose that's what I'm asking for, but I'm also sort of more generally asking, how did you grow so quickly? What strategies did you use to grow in that time frame?
Yeah, so let's talk about growth. So actionable takeaway number 1 would be solve for 0 to 1 growth with your podcast. There is an extremely low barrier to entry to launching a podcast. I could record a conversation with my fiance on my phone in the kitchen and put it on the internet and say, we've got a podcast together. And so the hardest part about building a podcast is not actually creating it, it's building the initial 0 to 1 audience.
Yep.
The way that we did that was my co-founder and I made a commitment to each other that before the launch, we were each going to text 200 people in our networks twice. One, to let them know, hey, we're releasing a podcast next week. When it goes live, would you be willing to give us a rating and a review and share it? We didn't ask them to do it yet. This is really important. There's some nuance here. We didn't say, hey, the show is live. Will you go rate and review it? We said, when it does go live, would you be willing to? The ask was extremely low. You didn't have to do anything yet. And so most people said yes because there wasn't any action they had to take in the moment. Well, then a week later when we said, hey, it's officially live, you said you were going to do this. People then, it was kind of harder. They wanted to be consistent with what they had said earlier. So we each made a list of literally 200 people. So the first 20, easy. Family, friends, great. People that I'm really close with. The next 100, little bit tougher, but it was college acquaintances, friends from high school, more extended family. The last 50 people, Matt, I'm texting ex-girlfriends to be like, hey, I'm launching a podcast. Some of those didn't get responses, but the point was you had to sort of stretch and go beyond your immediate network. So early days, we've got 400 people rating, reviewing, and it all happened on one day. So you have this thunderclap spike of all of a sudden there's some buzz. We've got people sharing on LinkedIn, etc. And that solved for building the initial audience right off the bat.
Yeah, can I just jump in? So with those initial reviews, what platform were you asking those people to review you on?
Oh, gosh. I think it was Apple. I think because what's really interesting is at the time, Apple was the number 1 podcast listening platform. It's Spotify now. So if I did it today, I would do Spotify.
Yeah. Gotcha. Thank you. Sorry. Next takeaway.
Actionable takeaway number 2 to really get the podcast going in the early days would be on the day of launch, have 3 to 5 episodes release all in one batch. Because the worst thing you could do is you create all this buzz, people go check it out, and you have just 1 episode. You want to give people from the earliest days the bingeability quality of your show. So have 3 to 5 episodes in the hopper released on your launch day. And then what you want to do is have another 3 to 4 already recorded so you are ahead of your cadence. stuff is going to happen, and like you're going to have unexpected travel or a guest will cancel last minute. And it's really, really important that you set and keep the cadence to train your audience to understand and expect and anticipate your release schedule. The worst thing you could do is miss that. So be really, really diligent about that, but make it basically impossible for yourself to fail by getting ahead of those things. And then actionable takeaway number 3 would be the real way that you grow your show is via the guests and the personal brands and the promotion of the guests, at least for us. And so for us, we really had a strong initiative to make every guest promote the show multiple times. And the way that we did that was at the end of the interview with the guest, that's when your rapport with them is the strongest. And so at the end of the show, we would ask them, or what we would do is we still use this talk track. At the end, we say, okay, great. We sort of give them a preview of what we're going to do from here is get the show over to our editors. They're going to chop it up, make us all sound great. The day that your show launches, I'm going to make a post to promote on LinkedIn. Armand, my co-founder, is going to make a post to promote on LinkedIn. We're going to have our company page do a pretty big promo push. We'll send it out to our newsletter list. Hey, if we send you a video clip in advance, would you be cool to make a post promoting your appearance on the show? And what you do here is it's similar to like the get people to review your show. We're telling them all the things we're going to do to promote them. And it's really hard because of the principle of reciprocity for them to say, no, I'm not going to promote my episode. And so everybody, when you ask them live, when you have that really strong rapport, will commit to doing that. And then we make it really, really easy for the guest to promote. We'll send them like really, really tightly edited short form video clips that they can share on social. We'll sometimes even like pre-write posts for guests of like, hey, here's what you might want to consider posting. And if you think about the accrued impact of, I think we're at like 250 episodes now, maybe more. I haven't looked in a while. Those guests promoting out to their network and posting helps you grow and grow and grow. So make it really easy for your guests to promote. Ask them directly, especially when your rapport is high, and then hold them accountable. If we didn't see somebody post, like we have a member of our team follow up, and make them feel guilty. It's an investment of our time and our resources. Like it's not free to produce a podcast. And if they said they were going to do it, we're going to follow up. At a certain point, you're like, okay, there's only so far you're going to go. But if you stay on top of your guests, they will be one of your biggest growth engines.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I also just want to take a little bit of time to touch on your newsletter. You have over 50,000 subscribers to your newsletter. Any strategies or tactics that you can share with us in how you grew that following?
It's not particularly sophisticated, but the early days, the fastest way that we found to grow a newsletter in the early days is get opt-ins from webinars. So we throw webinars, but then we also star on, like there's a lot of like, most of our audience is like B2B sales professionals, and those folks sign up for webinars. And we identified, I don't know, probably the top 3 other like big media companies in our space. And we have a really, really like pretty valuable brand. We can help draw a big crowd. And so when we go guest on someone else's webinar and we get the lead list or the registration list, those are opt-in contacts that we can add to our newsletter. Now, you got to make sure that you're mailing them in a valuable way and not just dumping them in a really crummy newsletter sequence. But that was the fastest way to build up an opt-in mailing list early. From there, however, webinar was like a great way to grow fast. It doesn't go far because there's only so many webinars that I can go appear on and only so many other like random audiences that I can go acquire from guesting on webinars. And so for us, like the longer term strategy of really growing a sustainable newsletter mailing list, because there's a decay to every newsletter mailing list, right? I get people from a webinar, they get on my mailing list. Some people unsubscribe, other people change jobs, so their domain, like their email isn't valid anymore. The long-term play for us, and we've just started doing this, has just been like putting out really good organic content on our website, and people will Google how to kick off a sales call and they'll land on our site, and we have a variety of things on the site to like get people to fill out forms, download gated content, and add them to our mailing list. So that's been like our longer sustainable strategy. What else? We have a LinkedIn newsletter, which has been really, really valuable because you don't have to you can still get to their inbox. LinkedIn will send it to their inbox. And we use our LinkedIn newsletter to push to our real owned newsletter. Because although we get in people's the way that I think about it is like owning their email address and owning their opt-in for our newsletter is more valuable than having to go through LinkedIn, who could change their newsletter algorithm or that stuff at any time. But LinkedIn is still valuable, so growing the LinkedIn newsletter and using it to push to the real newsletter is another strategy that we've been trying to work on.
Absolutely, Nick. I'm really making you work here, but you're such a champion in this area. I'm gonna keep forging ahead. I won't call them by name, but you've got some big sponsors that you work with on your brand. How did you go about getting those? You've been doing this for, it seems like 4 years, basically.
Yeah. I would say 80% of our sponsors are totally cold outbounded. So cold call, cold email, try to get someone in our audience to make a warm introduction. I'll tell you, my recent prospecting strategy has been as follows. We have as you mentioned, like pretty big newsletter mailing list to 50,000 folks. I have 60,000 people who follow me on LinkedIn. More often than not, I have someone who is a fan of 30 Minutes to President's Club or me, who is connected with the CMO of a company that's in our ICP. And I'll reach out to you, Matt, to get an introduction to Greg, the CMO over here. And I'll actually I'll draft a note, I'll write a message for you to send to that person. Hey, Greg, Nick Cegelski from 30 Minutes to President's Club asked for an introduction to you. Here's why he said he thought it was relevant for us to talk. He asked me to reach out, do you want me to make the introduction or not? And that's been a really effective channel for me, using our B2C fans to make introductions to our B2B sponsorship economic buyers.
Wow. If you needed any more reason to believe that you guys are giving out great sales advice, I think that's it right there. It's 80% outbound to get these sponsors is super impressive. Well, I was going to shift a little bit. I actually read that somebody that you had worked for in the past had described you as one of the best prospectors that they had ever seen. I wondered if you could, what makes a great prospector in sales? Maybe 3 qualities or tactics.
I think a lot of salespeople get their head wrong when it relates to prospecting. If you look at most of your job when you're cold calling or cold emailing is to sift through monotony and rejection to find the 1 or 2 yeses in the dozens upon dozens of no. And so the first thing to be a great prospector, really a great business person, is understand that even if your batting average is really, really bad, it's less about your percentage win and it's more about the volume of wins that you are getting. So stop going in with the expectation that if I call 10 people, I'm doing it wrong if only one of them says yes. That's actually pretty good if 1 out of every 10 person I call ends up turning into a meeting. So you've got to understand that and recognize that your success in sales is going to be determined by the number of uncomfortable conversations that you are willing to go seek out. And so it's less about winning all the time, and it's more about, okay, how much discomfort am I willing to go seek out? And if you will do that time and time again, all of the activity you do will start to accrue. I'll give you another really tangible one, which is when it comes to cold calling, I'm a big fan of what's called a permission-based opener, which sounds something like if I cold called you and you said hello, I'd say, Matt, this is Nick Cegelski with 30 Minutes to President's Club. I'm going to be honest, this is a cold call, but it is a well-researched cold call, and I'm wondering if I can get, half a minute to share why I called you specifically. What I've done here, said my name, said my company, I owned that it was a cold call, but I used a little bit of humor, and then I put you in control. And you would not believe 8 out of 10 people will respect the fact that you are honest that it was a cold call. Told them it was well-researched, because hopefully you did a little bit of prep before your call, or at least are calling a very targeted persona, and they'll give you that half a minute. As opposed to trying to storm your way in and Matt, the reason I'm calling you, and you're whoa, totally thrown off. So I love using what's called a permission-based opener. So I would say, don't expect to win all the time. Actually expect to lose more than you win. 2, use a permission-based opener. The last one would be when you're reaching out to somebody, recognize that most sales conversations fail not because of starvation, you don't communicate enough information, but they fail because of indigestion. You communicate too much information where you communicate information in a way that is not really, really clear and easy for the other person to understand. It is your responsibility as a salesperson or a business owner to make it as easy as possible for the other party to understand the problems that you solve and your value proposition. And if they can't get it like that, you need to do the work of pre-chewing the information you communicate. A different way to think about it, there's a quote that's attributed to Mark Twain. I don't know if he actually said it, but the quote is, "If I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter." That's your job in sales, is to take the hours that you could explain your product and find a way to write or say that shorter letter.
Nick, I love that so much, particularly opting into uncomfortable conversations. Your co-founder of 30 Minutes to President's Club said of you, I can count the number of times that Nick has walked into tense political environments and then immediately dispelled all tension and bad blood. I feel like that sort of speaks to that quality that you were just referring to. I'm curious, do you think that is something that you can teach?
I think that comes from the fact that you will win more deals and you'll be more successful in business when you are more focused on being interested than being interesting. And I think that comes from, it's the how to win friends and influence people philosophy of like seek first to understand before you're trying to be understood. And if you're in any sort of conflict, the first thing you do is you basically just let the other person tire themselves out and share their point again and again and again. And what happens is two things. Is one, if you let the other person go first and share all their frustrations, concerns, feelings, etc., one, they're going to feel like, okay, wow, this person actually heard me out and listened to, which immediately lowers the tension. But then two, that information is like, that's your advantage in the conversation, is if you share all this detail about your perspective and your point of view with me, I now have the ammo that I need to be able to navigate that conversation with far more nuance and far more effectively than if I tried to go first. Because I understand what you value and what you don't value. I understand the language that you use also, which I'm going to, what's the term when you change your language? Is it code shift, context shift? Anyways, I'm going to use language that is more like what you're using. Yeah, like you wouldn't talk to your grandmother the same way that you talk to, a business prospect, for example. So it's the seek first to understand before trying to be understood. And it's also the recognizing that you win more deals being interested than being interesting.
Absolutely. Nick, I'm just going to sort of land us here at just really thanking you for being here, and also just saying that, in my eyes, you are truly a role model in terms of being a communicator, being a coach, being an interviewer. I'd like to get a little bit vulnerable at the end of this interview, and maybe I won't include it, but I wonder if there is any actionable coaching feedback that you could give me on how I hosted this interview.
I would say that it's nothing that happened in the interview. I would say I asked you 2 questions up front before we started, which were, what do I need to know about like the logistics of this recording? Is it going to be post-production edited, etc.? And then I also asked you, what could I do to be a really, really good guest on this? And you answered both of those questions and gave me the information that I needed. But I actually think you'll make a better impression upon your guests when you proactively share those things or set the agenda of like, hey, here's how we're going to use this time. So, hey, here's how the next, I think you scheduled 30 minutes with me. Here's typically how we use these 30 minutes. Like, that's actually how I would kick it off. Guest shows up and I say, great, thank you for joining us. Here's how we typically use these 30 minutes. I'm going to give you the 30-second what to expect from this is probably your first time on this special Riverside recording platform. I'll give you the what to expect there. Then what we'll do is we'll spend a minute or two just talking about like the general direction of the interview. I want to make sure that like you feel comfortable with the content and the questions that I shared. And then we'll end up recording for probably 25 minutes and send you on your way. So I would give them more expectations up front. No, I thought you did a great job otherwise. It was really good. I think it'll just make it even, you'll get into it faster and they won't be wondering, okay. Plus, you can also set the expectation. I do this on our podcast in the beginning, is I always tell them from a content perspective what we are looking for and who the audience is. And I think that helps, particularly when you have a more experienced podcast guest. It helps them understand what they need to deliver. Because the way that I would deliver a podcast recording for a entry-level salesperson will be very, very different than for tenured enterprise salespeople. So understanding the audience, I think, is also something that's useful for any guest, but particularly a more experienced one.
I love it. True to form, super actionable things I can start implementing today. So I really appreciate you doing that on the fly. It is absolutely advice that I will take with me in the future. Nick, just to wrap us out here, why don't you tell us where people can find you if they're more interested in you, if they're more interested in 30 Minutes to President's Club?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the easiest way. My first name is easy, Nick. My last name's a little tougher, Cegelski. But I accept all LinkedIn connection requests as long as you don't send me a weird, like, hey, Nick, would you like to get some free Bitcoin or something? I get weird spam messages on LinkedIn. But yeah, I accept all connection requests, and I really appreciate you having me on, Matt.
Absolutely. And for everybody out there, it is 30 Minutes to President's Club across, I believe, all podcasting platforms. And you can also go to 30mpc.com to see a full range of products and events and such. So, Nick, thanks again. Thank you so much for spending time with us, and we'll see you next time. If you are listening and you are interested in exploding your own digital growth, you can get in touch with Jump 450 in the link below in the description. That is www.jump450.com. And don't forget to subscribe for more weekly episodes. We'll see you next time.